Well, good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's event, Litigating Genocide at the International Court of Justice with Arsalan Suleman. My name is John Keats and I direct Loyola's Office of Peace and Justice. This is the third installment in this year's Bunting Peace and Justice Speaker Series, which brings leaders, scholars, and activists to Loyola to address issues of timely relevance at the intersection of peace and justice. It has already been a stimulating semester, so please check out our website for videos of our events. It is a great honor to introduce Arsalan Suleman. Arsalan serves as counsel in the Foley Hoag law firm and its international litigation and arbitration practice. He focuses on representing sovereign states in international disputes, including before UN treaty bodies, US courts, the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, and as we will hear about today, the International Court of Justice. Prior to his current work, Arsalan served as the US Department of State's acting special envoy to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, or the OIC, the world's second largest international organization after the United Nations. He engaged with the OIC member countries, and relevant civil society groups on a broad range of foreign policy issues, establishing partnerships in areas such as human rights, countering violent extremism, health, education, entrepreneurship, and science and technology. Arsalan is a graduate of Georgetown University, and as a George Mitchell Scholar, he earned a master's degree in international peace studies from Trinity College, Dublin. And he also holds a JD from Harvard Law School. In addition to his legal work, Arsalan serves as a fellow at Georgetown's Institute for the Study of Diplomacy, and he is also the chair of America Indivisible, a nonprofit organization devoted to addressing bigotry against members of Muslim communities and those who appear to be Muslim by reinforcing the values of equality, pluralism, and strength through diversity. Last year, Arsalan became involved in a highly important case at the International Court of Justice relating to the treatment of the Rohingya people in Myanmar. The case, as he will share, has far-reaching implications for how the international community acts on its obligation to enforce the 1948 Genocide Convention and hold nations accountable for genocidal acts. Arsalan is going to begin our session today by sharing some background to the case to help us understand the events that led up to it and how the case has played out. After his remarks, we'll have some time for extended conversation. I have some questions from students that have been submitted in advance, and I'll ask those on their behalf. There's also a comment box for those of you who are listening and like to ask a question. Please feel free to put your question in that and we will ask it. So without further ado, join me in welcoming Arsalan Suleman.
Thank you so much, John. It's a real pleasure to be with you and to see you again and to speak with your students and colleagues about the Gambia case against Myanmar for the Rohingya genocide. Well, just wanted to, say John and I go back a long ways, all the way back to our time together in Ireland on the George Mitchell program. So it's always been a pleasure to keep up with John and to be such good friends and to see all of your great work and your great, writing, and enjoy reading a lot of your stuff. So very jealous that your students get the pleasure of having such a cool professor. So I'll just jump right into it, give you a little bit of the background of the case and where we are now. So I think many of you hopefully are familiar with the situation of the Rohingya, who they are. The Rohingya are a Muslim minority group who live and are based in the western part of Myanmar in an area called Rakhine State, and particularly in the north of Rakhine State. They're a community that has been in that part of the world for hundreds of years. There used to be a kingdom there called Arakan, and so you might see references to Arakan in the names of various groups from that region. But unfortunately, for the Rohingya, they have faced a lot of challenges over the years. They have, in particular, since Myanmar gained independence, been subjected to a long history of discrimination and discriminatory policies that targeted them on the basis of their identity, their separate racial, ethnic, and religious identity. Over time, there had been a number of government initiatives that had been designed to either disenfranchise or take their citizenship rights away in various ways. And many of those episodes have included violent acts, including essentially pogroms, where they had been subjected to violence and were forced to flee in the past. And that history is part of the story in terms of the genocide that they're facing and that they are subjected to, because it helps to show the kind of steady progression of the dehumanization and the targeting of the Rohingya as a group that they've been subjected to. Their situation got progressively worse over time, of course. In particular, in 2012, there was an episode in which the Rohingya were targeted for violence after allegations of the rape of a Buddhist woman at the hands of Rohingya men, which led to targeted attacks against the Rohingya and a number of, thousands, tens of thousands of Rohingya having to flee their villages and ultimately becoming refugees or internally displaced. Around that time, I was at the State Department and sort of first began to kind of closely monitor the situation and engage on the situation with our counterparts at the OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And steadily, the situation kind of continued in the negative direction that was happening. There was a refugee crisis where a number of Rohingya were fleeing Myanmar on boat and landing in places like Indonesia and Malaysia. And that kind of led up to 2016 and 2017, where the worst of the genocidal violence began. I'll just go through this quickly because I know, I think many of you may be aware of this already, but in 2016 and then 2017, in particular, August of 2017, Myanmar's armed forces launched what they called clearance operations. These were operations that they claimed were designed to address a threat by a terrorist group called the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, ARSA, A-R-S-A. But in fact was actually a policy designed to essentially deal with the Rohingya situation once and for all. They're essentially their equivalent of a final solution. And in fact, they used similar rhetoric to that. Their commander-in-chief said that the Rohingya situation is a longstanding one that they're finally resolving now. And he said those words during the clearance operations themselves. And what the Myanmar military did was essentially they would go village by village and attack the village and the civilian population within it. They would encircle the village. They would separate the women from the children. Separate the men from the women. The men were often subjected to direct executions. The women subjected to rape and gang rape. And the children and the elderly were not spared. They were also targeted for killing. And they did this throughout Rohingya villages all across northern Rakhine state. And the death toll was, in the thousands, over 10,000 dead for sure. They don't know the exact death toll. But because of the clearance operations, many of the Rohingya population tried to flee and tried to escape for their lives, and they crossed the border into Bangladesh in order to protect their lives. And Bangladesh ended up hosting over 700,000 refugees because of that exodus. And so this was going on in 2017 and 2018, and there was a lot of coverage happening. There were journalists in the area who were covering it. There were a lot of stories in the news about the Rohingya and about the stories that they were telling about absolutely brutal and horrific violence. I mean, stories that you just really can't imagine. But unfortunately, the international community wasn't mobilized in a way that would lead to some sort of response that could stop the violence. In the UN Security Council, the main venue where you would expect decisions to be taken at the international level to maintain or preserve international peace and security, Myanmar enjoys essentially the protection of China. And China often vetoes attempts at resolutions or statements that are meant to focus on the situation there. And so the chance of a sort of Security Council sponsored intervention or sanctions or referral to the International Criminal Court have really been lacking and aren't really that likely to happen given China's role there. So activists and others who are following the issue had to look at different means of figuring out what they can do about the situation. One really important step that was taken was that the UN Human Rights Council adopted resolutions on the situation. They actually have been adopting resolutions on Myanmar for quite a number of years, but with the Rohingya crisis, they specifically adopted additional resolutions meant at focusing on the situation. And that the main resolution that they adopted in 2017 created what's called a fact-finding mission. It's a formal mission that's endorsed or established by the Human Rights Council and given a UN mandate to investigate and report on the human rights violations that were occurring in Myanmar. And that fact-finding mission ended up producing a extremely voluminous, over 400 pages, but an extremely credible and comprehensive report on the situation in Myanmar, and in particular the situation for the Rohingya. And as part of that report, they detailed the horrors of the clearance operations, the attacks on civilians, the executions, the murders. And what they did was they conducted an analysis. They looked at 7 different factors that they said contributed to an inference of genocidal intent. And those factors include a history of discrimination, discriminatory policies. It includes the government's use of hate speech and rhetoric targeting and dehumanizing the Rohingya, as well as the government's tolerance of that hate speech by society, in particular by elements of society like Buddhist monks. In addition to the brutality of the actions, the organized nature of the actions, the use of sexual violence, and the impunity that was pervasive in terms of the lack of any accountability for any of the crimes that were committed. And all of those 7 factors led this fact-finding mission to conclude that genocide is occurring against the Rohingya. And that report was extremely important in terms of the way that the Gambia and the OIC viewed the situation and ultimately reacted to the situation. In 2018, I'll give a little bit of more depth to this part of the story, and I hope I'm not taking too much time on this stuff, John. But so in 2018, the OIC they hold an annual meeting of their foreign ministers, and the meeting in 2018 was actually held and hosted by Bangladesh. So Bangladesh, which is hosting, was hosting at that time, around 700,000 refugees. They're hosting this meeting, this ministerial meeting of foreign ministers of the member states of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And as part of that meeting, they brought some of the delegations to visit the refugee camps and to visit the refugees so that they could hear firsthand the terrible suffering that they had to go through and that they survived. And one of the members of the OIC is the Gambia, the tiny West African state of the Gambia. And out of sheer coincidence, the foreign minister of the Gambia was not able to attend this particular meeting of the OIC. And instead of him going, he asked his justice minister to go. And his justice minister was an individual by the name of Abu Bakr Tambadou. He is someone who, just based on his own personal history, he had spent over 10 years prosecuting genocide. He was a prosecutor for the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. And so he had expertise in knowing and understanding what genocide is and what genocide looks like. And so when he met with the victims, he was moved personally, and he felt that this was very clearly genocide. And so he led an effort within the OIC at that meeting to create a committee that would focus on opportunities for justice and accountability for the Rohingya. And that committee, that effort ended up being approved. He created his committee. It's called the Ad Hoc Ministerial Committee for the Rohingya. That committee was then sort of a platform that we ended up using for advancing this case. And so, then the next part of the story involves sort of some of the outreach and efforts to think through what options are available. Around 2019, I had been, in 2018, that same summer, I had reached out to some of my colleagues, my former colleagues at the OIC, and was talking to them about the idea of an ICJ case regarding the Rohingya, and they said, well, you should talk to the Gambia. They just created this committee and their justice minister is really involved. And so I got in touch with him and met with him in New York when he was there for the UN General Assembly meetings in the fall of 2018. And he really felt that the ICJ idea was a really strong idea. Personally, given his background in criminal justice, he felt, I think he was interested in the option of the International Criminal Court, the ICC. But the ICJ, I think, option was also appealing to him, given the fact that jurisdictionally there was a stronger case there, and I'll get into that in a minute. But oh, sorry, one second. I was just looking to try to share my screen so I can share a couple of things, but I'm having trouble doing that, unfortunately. Let's see if I'm able to do it. But anyway, I'll keep going. So he invited me to go to Banjul in February of 2019 to present to his committee. And so I did that and was able to talk to them. Is the screen being shared now, John?
Yeah, I can see
it.
It
is. Okay, good. Okay, sorry about that. What do you see? Sorry, I just want to make sure you're seeing.
We've got a slide here, Gambia versus Myanmar, International Court of Justice. Okay,
perfect. So that, right, the gentleman standing at the podium is Abu Bakr Tambadou. He's the former justice minister for the Gambia, and he's the man who led the Gambia's efforts to take this case on. He was the one who went to Cox's Bazar in 2018 as part of that OIC meeting and met with victims and decided that something had to be done. So it was his committee that I attended, meeting that I attended in February of 2019, and presented a few different options for them to consider in terms of pursuing an ICJ case, pursuing or having OIC members support the ICC in its investigation, or pursuing other options. And ultimately, the committee decided to file the ICJ case. and they ended up getting the approval of the OIC more broadly, and then the Gambia itself went through its internal approval process to ultimately bring the case, which was done in November. And the reason why the ICJ case was a really an appealing prospect was that the 1948 Genocide Convention, it not only establishes genocide as a crime under international law, it also places obligations on the states party to that treaty to affirmatively prevent genocide, to punish genocide where it occurs, and as has been interpreted by the ICJ, there's also an implicit obligation not to commit genocide. And Myanmar was a party to this treaty, as was the Gambia. And under this treaty, there's a dispute resolution clause, Article 9 of the treaty, which says that if there's any dispute between parties to this treaty over the application, interpretation, or fulfillment of the convention, those disputes can go to the International Court of Justice for adjudication. And so that's what the Gambia decided to do. The Gambia decided that because it has a disagreement with Myanmar over Myanmar's fulfillment of the convention, because the Gambia views Myanmar as having been engaging in genocidal acts against the Rohingya, the Gambia decided to bring its dispute to the International Court of Justice for adjudication. And it did so in November. It filed its case in November of 2019. As part of that filing, it asked the court to issue provisional measures. These are kind of like the ICJ's version of a restraining order. It provides for binding obligations on the parties pending resolution of the ultimate dispute. And the Gambia had requested that the court order Myanmar to not only stop genocidal acts, but also to prevent them and to preserve the evidence of genocide, because although the clearance operations had, for the most part, had ceased, the remaining Rohingya in Myanmar, 600,000 or so of them, continued to remain at risk of ongoing genocide, because all of the indicia of genocidal intent remained, and all of the factors that made them so vulnerable to that type of violence remained. And in fact, the UN fact-finding mission issued a report in 2019 that concluded exactly that the Rohingya who remained there remained vulnerable to genocide. And so we asked the court for those provisional measures. There was a hearing in December of 2019, which we see here on the slide, the picture of the minister speaking as part of that hearing. And you can notice that to his left, to our right, you see Myanmar's essentially their defense table, which includes Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel laureate who was leading their delegation. We asked the court for those provisional measures. The court ended up siding with the Gambia. In January, a 17-0 unanimous decision was issued by the court ordering Myanmar not to commit genocide, to also affirmatively take action to prevent genocide from occurring, to preserve the evidence of genocide, and to ensure that evidence is not destroyed, and also to report back to the court periodically on its implementation. And so that has set the stage for where we are now in the case. On October 23rd, the Gambia filed its main substantive brief in the case. It's called the memorial. It sets forth the Gambia's full case on the merits of the case, and sets out all the reasons why the Gambia believes that genocide occurred and why Myanmar is responsible for that genocide. And Myanmar will have an opportunity to file a brief in opposition to that. They have 9 months to do so. So their brief is due in July of 2021. And after those briefs are in, the court may decide to order an additional round of briefing if it wants to give the parties more opportunity to answer various arguments that are being put forward. But ultimately, at some point, there will be a hearing on the merits in which the court will ultimately hear the details of the case. And just before we go on to maybe questions, I just wanted to step back again to some of the thoughts behind the ICJ approach versus the ICC approach. So the International Court of Justice is the United Nations principal legal body. It is the body set up by the UN Charter to deal with disputes between nation states. And you see on the left is the Peace Palace in The Hague, where the ICJ sits. So the reason why the ICJ and the Genocide Convention were such an attractive option, I mentioned before, because Myanmar is a party to that treaty, because they have already given their consent as part of that treaty to jurisdiction to the ICJ for hearing disputes, it was a really attractive way of holding the state directly responsible for its obligations under that treaty, and ensuring some mechanism of redress for the Rohingya victims for the horrific crimes that they have suffered. The ICC, which is also based in The Hague, but deals with individual criminal proceedings, that is a court which can hear cases in which individuals are being charged for crimes under international law, under the court statute. But for the court to have jurisdiction, either the state from where the crimes occurred has to be a member of the court, or the Security Council has to refer the action to the court. And in this case, Myanmar is not a party to the Rome Statute, so it's not a member of the International Criminal Court. And the Security Council, as we discussed, is not it has not referred the situation in Myanmar to the ICC, and it's very difficult to see that happening, at least at the moment. And there is a theory that the ICC prosecutor is investigating and pursuing in terms of certain crimes that may have started in Myanmar but were completed on the territory of Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is a party to the Rome Statute and the International Criminal Court. So there is a theory that some crimes, if they were completed in part on the territory of a state party to the ICC, that the prosecutor would have jurisdiction, and a chamber of the ICC has found that to be the case. They've endorsed that theory, and the ICC prosecutor is engaging in an investigation. So just one last thing I wanted to mention before we turn over to Q&A is just, what is this case all about? And it's about justice for the survivors. These individuals here are members of the Rohingya community. The three in the middle, well, if you look at the gentleman in the middle and the two women to either side of him, those three individuals came directly from the refugee camps in Bangladesh and Cox's Bazar, the Kutupalong refugee camp, and they came to the proceedings in December in order to be there and hear the proceedings themselves. And that was an important step to not only have the victims there and represented at the proceedings, because it highlighted that this is a case about them, that the Gambia is seeking justice for the crimes that they suffered. And these are real human lives who were affected by the violence. And it was really moving, as part of the proceedings. I want to share one thing. I don't know if it's going to work, but I'm going to try it. But there was, as we were going into the court on one of the days, there was a video that was sent to us of Rohingya refugees in the camps. And are you seeing a video queued up, John?
We are.
Yeah. Now. Okay. There was a video that was sent to us of Rohingya refugees in the camps, chanting their support for Gambia in what the Gambia was doing. So I'm gonna try to play this to see if it comes through. Were you able to hear that?
We see the visual, don't hear the audio. You may want to
Oh, okay, that's my bad. Let me try one thing. I think I must have not clicked the right thing when I was trying to share it. All right, I'll try it one more time. So as you could hear, they were chanting Gambia, Gambia. And we saw that video just before we were going into the core room in December. And it was really powerful just to feel that the fact that we have, tens of thousands of people in these refugee camps who were really putting their hopes. This is the first time, this case was the first time that any court was going to hear their claims, their stories, and mind you, for most of these individuals, they spent their lives hearing from people in their home country that they don't exist as a people, that what they claim to be their self-identified identity is not recognized by the government, and that they are illegal migrants in a country and don't deserve to be there or to live. So I'll stop there. Hopefully we have enough time for all the questions from your students and others.
Thank you so much, Arsalan, for sharing that, for your involvement in this case. It's a tremendous inspiration to all of us. And what a testament to the interconnected nature of our world. A lawyer in the United States on behalf of Gambia bringing an accountability case against Myanmar, some half century after the Genocide Convention, was signed by both, parties. So thank you so much. A lot of questions from students, and I want to encourage anyone who's listening to use that chat box to have your questions for Arsalan. I want to begin, several students are just intrigued how you personally, Arsalan, got involved in this. One student writes, a situation such as this is so heartbreaking to learn about. What led you to speak up about this awful situation? What drove you to fight on behalf of Gambia? Can you walk us into kind of the personal side of your involvement in this?
Sure, yeah, and I appreciate that question because there's so many situations ongoing that we read about and we just feel like this is horrible. What can we do? You might donate, but for me, I think I had sort of the honor, privilege, responsibility of having been placed in certain positions that allowed me to build certain relationships and have certain platforms to use. So my time at the State Department, when I was representing the United States government vis-a-vis its relationship with the OIC, I was able to establish a number of relationships with people there, and the concerns that we shared about certain regions, they shared as well. So the Rohingya is a great example of a share, an area where we had shared concerns and shared goals, and tried to advance cooperation on that. And when I left, and I left in January 2017 when the Trump administration began, because I was part of the Obama administration before. I ended up joining the law firm that I joined later towards the end of that year. And it was a really great fit because my law firm focuses in, the group that I'm in my law firm, the practice group that I'm a part of, we focus in particular on representing sovereign states in international disputes. And so that sort of gave me a platform to be able to go to my former counterparts at the OIC and say, hey, look, I'm now part of this law practice. We represent states in these kind of disputes. Here's an idea for how we can potentially hold a state like Myanmar accountable for what it's doing. And just the kind of stars aligned in terms of those relationships, the involvement of Minister Tambadou and his personal sort of commitment and drive and background, and connecting with him and getting him on board. It sort of just led to this really perfect situation where we were able to do something that's rare, in the sense that it's rare for states to bring these disputes to the ICJ because states prefer, in large part, just to kind of negotiate things out. But it's even more rare for a state like Gambia, which doesn't have a direct stake in the conflict, right? They're not the ones hosting the refugees. They're thousands of miles away. And it really takes a really principled and impressive individual like Minister Tambadou, someone who really cares about international justice and accountability. It really takes a leader like him for this type of case to actually come about. So I just give full credit to him and his leadership and his vision.
Thank you for that, Arsalan. So I've got a lot of student questions about ways to intervene in ongoing genocides. Also have a really great question in the chat. That question is, from your work, what more could have, should have been done earlier by neighboring states or the international community? What opportunities may have been missed in that 2016-2017 year that can be learned for future concerns? Was the further action that just recently happened at the mercy of the proved facts delivered by the fact-finding mission in 2019? The formalized legal element layer obviously has needed preparation. Could it have been done any sooner? I also have, in some of the questions students submitted, just more broad questions about when there is a genocide going on, the different ways. This is a way to use a court option, and you talked a little bit about ICJ versus ICC. Another student asks, do you see a scenario in which a foreign country could come in and stop the genocide with their own forces, or would this only present more harm, conflict, and chaos? So the kind of argument around humanitarian intervention. Another student asks, I'm curious if you can speak to why more direct action against Myanmar hasn't taken place. How do we as citizens force the world to hold countries committing acts like this responsible? So can you speak a little bit to the variety of modes of response, from the court option to humanitarian intervention?
Yeah, no, those are really great questions, tough questions, because it's not, there's no really sort of perfect, I guess, playbook that you can use in terms of how to respond. I think so the sort of fundamental structural challenge that we have is that in the international system made up of sovereign states, you generally don't have sort of you don't have an overarching authority or police force or someone who can go in and stop things. And because of that, you are sort of forced into a situation of finding other tools or mechanisms to put pressure or to create ways of raising situations in order to bring about change in certain ways. And particularly for situations of violence within a country where you have, a group within a country being targeted, that creates a particular problem because, again, within the sovereign territory of a state, the international system does not have very easy options for allowing, direct intervention unless there's very clear political will. And here, as I alluded to before, in terms of what we have in the charter with the Security Council and the legal means of authorizing the use of force, or even authorizing, UN level sanctions, all that has to really go through the Security Council. And when you have a situation where there's a state like China that is protecting a state like Myanmar, it becomes difficult. It makes those mechanisms even more difficult to use. And so really, and part of this sort of, part of the, I guess, another challenge is that in the ASEAN region in particular, the notion of sovereignty and not interfering within the internal affairs of a state is also something that, at a normative level, is very strong within that group of states in Southeast Asia. And so there's also this normative sense that a lot of countries did not feel very comfortable putting too much public pressure on Myanmar, at least within that region. And so it required more pressure coming from outside, from states that are a little bit further out, whether that's Western states or others. And one of the challenges in these types of situations is when you have that kind of foreign pressure, it allows nationalistic forces within the country to kind of deflect by saying, oh, that's just, the West doing what it does and interfering in our internal affairs, et cetera. So it creates a lot of complicated narratives that can be used by forces within a country to kind of further pursue those policies and deflect from the international community's attention. So anyway, with all that background, I think there were frankly limited tools. If you can't use the Security Council, I think states were forced to try to raise awareness and raise pressure. Of course, there was a lot of humanitarian support. A lot of money came in to try to provide for the refugees that are being hosted in Bangladesh. But in terms of the additional pressure, a lot of that had to be diplomatic. There has to be sort of a shared understanding of the nature and extent of what was happening. And Myanmar, of course, was trying to obfuscate the reality and trying to blame the Rohingya for what was happening, and just complete fabrications, like allegations that they were burning their own villages and they burned down their own structures, and all kinds of blatant lies trying to cover up what they were doing. But I think it was a huge step to have the Human Rights Council create the fact-finding mission, because when the fact-finding mission's report came out, it provided a lot of the proof that was needed for many of the activists and others who were seeking greater action. And so it provided that really substantive justification that, okay, we're not just dealing with the situation of a counterinsurgency operation gone wrong. This is of a different order. This is a genocidal operation. And if nothing is done, then not only are these people never gonna get to go back to their home, but tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, are at further risk of violence and death. And the international community should not stand for this type of action going unpunished. And so there has been movement since in terms of some states sanctioning individuals. The United States has designated various Myanmar generals for sanctions, as has the UK and some other states. Germany, within the past year or so, I think, has suspended their aid given the situation and the government's complicity in the genocide. And various states are considering other mechanisms. So, unfortunately, at the international level, sometimes these steps take a little bit of time. Sometimes it takes time to set in, and states try to exhaust other means that are less coercive before moving to the more coercive means of redress. And so some states are slower in that process than others, but the Gambia, with the support of the OIC, moved forward where it thought it had to because of the situation. And I think other states are also in the process of making their own determinations and potentially providing support. Canada and the Netherlands, for example, have publicly stated their support for the Gambia's case and are planning to potentially intervene in the matter to help show that support.
Thank you so much for that. And you've anticipated several other concerns of students, really in terms of how Myanmar has responded to the charges. And a couple of questions from students, and then also there's one in the chat as well. But one of them is just the defense strategy. So the student's saying, I found it interesting that Myanmar's military defense is that this is a just war, that how does a justification like that get handled, in the ICJ proceedings? Another student writes, one of the generals claims that the actions committed by the military were just. What do you make of the use of even, moral frameworks like just war to kind of legitimate these acts? I think it also connects to a broader issue that came up in the Nuremberg tribunals, a lot of the cases at the ICC, where the defense will often talk about the specific crimes as war crimes or through the framework of war. Perhaps you could talk just a little bit about how important it is to make the distinction between genocide and war crimes. And perhaps for you, how did you navigate, the response to say, this wasn't just war crimes, this amounted to something categorically different. I'll just add on that in the chat, a student's asking specifically about the leader, Aung San Suu Kyi. Difficult question to ask, but why do you personally believe that she, someone who has stood for human rights and peace, won the Nobel Prize, continues to defend the actions of the soldiers against their Rohingya? Why do you believe that she's turned a blind eye to the events unfolding in front of her? And I was struck very much by that visual of Tamadou at the podium, and there she was sitting right there, about 2 feet away from him. So a couple of issues there, just would love your thoughts on.
Yeah. So in terms of genocide and the wartime context. I think, if you look at historically, most, if not all, of the genocides that we've seen unfold have basically happened during a time of war, right? I mean, the Holocaust was in the World War II context. Rwanda, you had the conflict ongoing there with Srebrenica. It was in the context of the Yugoslav war. And so it's not, it's not uncommon that in war, in an armed conflict context, that genocide can occur and does occur. And in this situation, it was very clear that it occurred just based on all of the factors that the FFM had looked into and that I briefly described. Just the facts of the matter in terms of how the civilians were specifically targeted, how they were separated, the modus operandi of the actions. Myanmar was trying to justify their actions by saying that they were taking, a counterinsurgency effort against an armed group. But if that's your intention, just because that's your intention, it doesn't mean you can do anything you want in pursuit of that intention. There are still legal rules, the laws of war or international humanitarian law that apply. And in particular, among those rules is, the concept of proportionality, being proportional in who you're targeting and ensuring that you're not using force beyond that which is necessary to achieve your particular military objective. And because of that, there's a very easy way of seeing, okay, does this make sense as an IHL, just international humanitarian law, justification, or is it something that's beyond it? And the facts of this situation were really far beyond the situation in terms of any potential reasonable action. In the first instance, ARSA itself, this terrorist group itself, was a really tiny group. I mean, they didn't have advanced weaponry. They're not like some of the armed groups that the Myanmar military is facing now in their country. I mean, there are armed insurgencies like with the Arakan army, where they actually are dealing with a sophisticated armed group. This was a very unsophisticated group that had like knives and sticks as their main weapons, and not not real heavy weaponry or anything like that. And just the scale and the tactics used and all of the evidence that indicates that what they were really trying to do was to destroy this group. And it's not just, looking at the actual conduct of the operations. It's also looking at the history of the discriminatory policies, the hate speech, the language that the government itself used in order to describe this group and describe what their goals were vis-a-vis this group. All of that goes towards showing the intention of destroying this group in whole or in part, which was part of the process. So yeah, I mean, it's not surprising at all that Myanmar was going to try to defend this as something that was justified. I think we expected them to have some sort of justification. They did admit during the hearings that war crimes may have occurred. I mean, I think their position was basically that, well, there may have been some war crimes or crimes against humanity, but it's not genocide. It's our burden to prove that it was genocide, and we think that we've done that. And as part of their defense, they're going to try to undermine that by saying, well, horrible things may have happened, but it wasn't done perhaps with the intention of destroying the group. So that's to be decided by the court ultimately, but we think that the evidence is very obviously on the side of the Gambia and the Rohingya in this case. And in terms of Aung San Suu Kyi and her role, she is seen by some as a human rights icon, although I think the numbers of people who still see her as such is dwindling. But she is also a politician, and she's a political figure, and she's someone who is a member of the Bamar majority. And I think there are some folks who argue that she actually might agree with this idea that this group of Rohingya shouldn't be there, and she may have some sympathy for that view. But at the end of the day, she does have a political role. She is seeking election, and their party, just went through a real, another election in the country, and so there are various factors that I'm sure she was considering in terms of the political impact of what she's doing in terms of defending the country. But as far as the case goes, as far as the Gambia goes, she has to answer for what the military did. The military is part of the state. And, she can't just say, well, that was the military, that wasn't us. Under the structure of government within Myanmar, the military does have a lot of say and control in the government, and it does have control over its own accountability. But ultimately, the state is responsible for that, and the state is going to be held responsible through this action.
You alluded to parts of this case are ongoing. A couple of students are asking, have you been satisfied with the response of Myanmar? Are we sure about genocidal acts being stopped at this present time? What are you projecting in the future? Can you talk a little bit about where things currently stand, if you're satisfied with the response, and what you expect in the future?
Yeah, I can't go into too much detail there, unfortunately, just because of just the nature of the representation. But I can say that for most observers, and again, this is a challenging situation because in Rakhine State, there's an ongoing armed conflict there. The government is in a non-international armed conflict with a group called the Arakan Army. It's it's an ethnic Rakhine group, but they operate in Rakhine State, including in parts of northern Rakhine State. And so that area where the Rohingya remain in the country is essentially a war zone. And it's very difficult for independent journalists and NGOs and humanitarian agencies to operate there. So it's very difficult to get sort of independent reporting on what's happening. But I can say that for all of the human rights groups and the Rohingya groups who are monitoring the situation and reporting on the situation, from their perspective, Myanmar has not done enough to follow and implement the court's orders. And in fact, the US Holocaust Memorial Museum has recently produced some very interesting and detailed reports about how Myanmar is not complying with the order because they are not taking steps that are necessary to alleviate the precarious situation facing the Rohingya in terms of restrictions on their movement, restrictions on their access to livelihoods, restrictions on their access to education. They were disenfranchised and not allowed to participate in this election, for example. All of these elements remain, and I think, in terms of the obligation on Myanmar to take affirmative steps to prevent genocide, to ensure that it's prevented, all of these risk factors for genocide need to be addressed. And according to a lot of these authorities, they're not being addressed.
So I have one student who's curious about the impact of ICJ rulings internally in countries that are affected. As student writes, I understand how the ICJ creates justice for victims of genocide, sets precedents on the international level. How do trials taken to the ICJ promote peace within a country that has experienced genocide? Do you think cases taken to the ICJ may sacrifice peace for justice? How does that, negotiating those values play out?
Yeah, so it's an interesting situation because you're dealing in an internal situation, right, where the group is internal to the country. You don't necessarily have sort of an interstate sort of peace process dimension to it. You have to deal with the reality of the situation within the state. And the reality for the Rohingya within the state is that they are being excluded and they are being marginalized and they are being, demonized and sought to be erased from the state altogether. The state does not recognize them as a group. The state does not recognize them as citizens. The state does not provide services to them in terms of education and healthcare, and is preventing them from accessing their livelihoods. So there is no, they don't have any sort of recourse for peace, right? They're being excluded and pushed back and turned away at every turn. So for them, what they really want is some modicum of recognition, some element of justice and accountability, some way for them to be able to live in their country and live as treated as others are treated. And so for them, there's not necessarily a trade-off here because there is no prospect for peace. There's nothing that's creating an incentive or pushing back on the government to change these policies, these abusive policies. And so I think for the community, they've been so fully supportive of this case because not only does it create a means of potentially, bringing about some measure of restitution or recompense and general recognition for what they've suffered, but it also is putting some pressure on the government to actually undo some of the discriminatory policies that make life impossible for them within the country.
Arsalan, we've got a lot of peace and justice minor students, global studies majors, history, poli-sci, a lot of people fired up about this issue. What advice do you have to them in the short term, but also career-wise? How can folks get involved meaningfully? You're a really interesting example of someone who's used international law as a way to intervene in ongoing crises. Can you speak a little bit to our students who are wanting to get involved and make a difference?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a really rewarding field to get involved in because you're trying to respond to situations in which people are undergoing really terrible crimes or attacks, and so it can be very meaningful to be involved in it. It can also be very frustrating, just to be honest, because as we've been discussing, the answers in a lot of these situations is not always clear. It's not always, you're not always able to file a case. You're not always able to get a government to sanction an individual. And even then, there's still the question about whether what you're able to achieve ultimately results in change on the ground, right? So, this work, it can be rewarding, and it can also be frustrating. It can take time. It's painstaking work. I think that's true for most human rights work, because in large part you're trying to change the behavior of actors without using force, and that is challenging, and it's not always successful. So, I would just say, stick with the work. If you've got the passion to do it, stick with it. Bear in mind that it's going to be challenging, and especially dealing with victims, you're going to hear horrible stories, and you're going to want to do things that to fix it, but you're not necessarily always going to be able to fix it. But I will say that when there are situations where you do get the government to do something, where you do get the international community to come around and actually take steps, and you can actually be a part of that process that leads to that. And I think this case is an example of that, where people who've been working on this situation, and NGOs and journalists and others who've been reporting on it, their work has really been vindicated, because we've been able to look at their reports and look at the evidence that they've gathered and include it as part of our brief that we've submitted to the court. And all of the work that people do to sort of give voice to the victims have also, helped play a really important role in our ability to then ensure that their voice is included as part of the case. We had a number of testimonies from the victims that were not taken by ourselves personally, but taken by groups that were interviewing the victims, like human rights groups, or journalists, or groups that sort of do legal representation work. So, there comes a time in some of these cases where you will be a part of that outcome and that solution. And I think, it's, you never underestimate the opportunity and the ability to do it. Again, sometimes it takes a situation where you have 3 or 4 coincidences that have to really line up for something to work out. But I can just say, the work, it makes a difference, and hopefully if you get involved in this type of work, you'll be able to see the difference that it makes. And certainly for the victims, it makes a huge difference. For anyone who takes the time to listen to their story, to hear their voice, for them, when they, in the situation that they're facing where they're being denied their identity, they're being denied their existence, just the mere act of sharing their story with someone becomes fulfilling, becomes affirming. And being a part of that is, hugely important.
Was a fitting note to conclude on. Really, on behalf of everyone, Arsalan, thank you so much for your role in defending the victims in this case, and for showing us a really important way of intervening in an ongoing crisis. And wishing you all the best as the case continues and all of your work. So thank you again. And thanks again, also for your personal friendship and your model for me. So thank you to everyone for listening in. Thanks to the students for your questions. And we'll put this up and consult our website for ways to stay involved. And Arsalan, are there any immediate ways that people can stay connected to this particular case?
Well, I guess I periodically put up, updates on this on like my Twitter account, but the ICJ, the court itself, also puts updates on it. Reuters has done a lot of fantastic reporting on developments on things as it goes along. Yeah, I think there are different ways, but those are a few of the ways. My own Twitter hashtag, I think I can put in the chat. Let's see. No, here we go. I can just put in the chat. It's at @Arsalan_Suleman.
There it is. Great. Well, we'll continue to follow your work. Thank you again, Arsalan, and wishing you all the best. Thanks for everyone for tuning in, and we'll talk to you again soon. Take care.
All right. Thanks a lot, John. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone.